Another problem with all genetic clocks is that natural selection erases mutations. If a mutation happens that's bad, obviously natural selection is going to eventually cause that bad mutation to disappear. That individual where that mutation occurs is going to be less successful than its neighbors, and eventually their lineage will die out, and so that mutation will be lost. And this has been a huge pain in the butt to try and figure out when we're doing evolutionary clocks. Like, we can measure how fast mutations occur in a population. That doesn't tell us how fast mutations reach what's called fixation. What percentage of those new mutations that crop up, which percentage of those will actually stick around? We can't tell that easily. It's very difficult. And that's why there's so many people working on this problem. And then finally, because mitochondria mutate so fast, you can have a problem of saturation. Oh wait, sorry. I forgot to put something on here. Saturation is another problem. Because mutations happen so quickly, you can get the same nucleotide can mutate multiple times throughout evolutionary time, and you can't tell. You can only tell that it's different than another nucleotide that you're looking at. You can't tell how many times in the past it's mutated. We call that saturation. So these are all problems with the mitochondrial clock. And because we have these problems with the mitochondrial clock, we have to use the fossil record right now, at least, to calibrate that mitochondrial clock. And that's something that Dr. Jeanson doesn't like, because he doesn't agree with the dates that we come up with the fossil record. So he doesn't like to use that to calibrate the mitochondrial clocks. Next slide. Any questions there?
None. Steve, do you have any on your end?
No.
I thought we were good.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is essentially his contention between the mitochondrial clock that we would, in the secular science community agree on, and the mitochondrial clock that he agrees to a certain degree exists, would be the compression of time. So he's essentially saying that the mutation rates happened at a faster pace, and we're allowing them to happen over the course of millions of years. So he's not contesting the fact that it exists. He's contesting how rapidly it happens. So by his logic, it's happening now at a pretty rapid fire pace in order to understand the mutation rates that we're seeing. Is that fair?
Yes, that is fair. He also thinks that when you find differences in DNA between really distant organisms like humans and fish, for example, you're not actually looking at mutations. You're looking at differences in creation. So God made those mutations.
So they were designed similarly. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
And that's kind of what I was going to go on it. The fact you said that he agrees with the old world, the new world monkeys, and we're clearly old world monkeys. So is he, for some reason, thinking there's a special reasons why this doesn't apply to the same exact standards and reasoning for the old world monkeys, just because we are old world monkeys? Is it a special pleading type thing, or what's the reasoning scientifically that it works for old world or something new world, but it doesn't work for old world?
Yeah, hopefully I mean, I don't want to speak for him too much here, because I read his book, but if I'm remembering things wrong, that's going to be bad for him. He's going to have to backpedal at the start of his debate tomorrow. But if I recall, all of the solid differences between larger groups, so between apes and monkeys, for example, those differences he believes were created differences. So God intentionally modified the mitochondria at the moment of creation so that they would be different, because those different animals would have different needs because they have different bodies, right? I think that's what his argument is. And that's a pretty weak argument. I'm sure there's something more to it that I'm forgetting. So, but he believes that, he believes in this common designer. And so he thinks the similarities between them are because there's a common designer, and the differences in families, we can equate those to evolution, but the differences between major groups, we cannot. those differences we have to say were because of the creator. So, yeah,
so like anything about above the family level, he would probably have an issue with.
Yeah, and he said he told me that he's not totally stuck on the family level, but it's something he's trying to find out. So he thinks that there's a way to figure it out, where the cutoff line is, and he wants to be able to articulate that and study that and be able to show people that you can actually find a difference between creation versus mutation differences. So, well, I'm sure we'll hear about that tomorrow.
There's
and he's honest in his desire too. He's really honest in his desire. He believes
we do have a quick
this is the case, and he's going to find evidence for it.
We do have a quick super chat. Dennis Tuttle asks for $2. Does mitochondrial DNA determine mitochondrial Eve?
Yes. And there's a lot of confusion about mitochondrial Eve. So it's coalescence. We look at all the different versions of mitochondria that exist in the human population today, and we use a molecular clock to estimate how long ago, how many mutations ago, was the most recent common ancestor of all modern humans. That's mitochondrial Eve. The most recent common ancestor of all modern humans. That's not the first human, though. And this is a really important thing to note, because there's so much confusion around this. She was not the first human. She's just our most recent common ancestor. So if you were to kill all the white people in the world, mitochondrial Eve would bump up way further in the timeline, because, well, actually not that much further, because we're a weird little node out there. But if you were to kill a chunk of the population, mitochondrial Eve would bump forward in time, because she's just the most recent common ancestor of everyone who's alive today. That makes sense? She's that that node for humans. So
it's the one woman we all have in common somewhere in our distant ancestry.
Yeah. She was successful. Her mitochondria outcompeted every other woman's mitochondria in the world, and there's no trace of anybody else's.
I think
Dr.
a lot of the
Mays
issues
says, good job so far.
that there's
John,
two types of DNA in the cell.
What's that?
Like they think all the DNA. I think a lot of the issue with understanding mitochondrial Eve is that people don't realize that they're dating it via mitochondria. They don't realize that there's two different types of DNA in the cell: the nuclear DNA, which is the DNA that you get from the sexual reproduction, and the just maternal DNA. So they don't realize that like they think that one woman just had babies with all the people, and that's the only way that makes logical sense, because they don't understand.
What happened is that her offspring outcompeted the offspring of everybody else eventually, and that probably took millions of years, right? Or there was a catastrophe, you have a species bottleneck, and that can happen pretty quickly, because if there's only like 1,000 people, whoever has the best mitochondria will eventually win in just a few generations, right? Their mitochondria will end up, their offspring will end up dominating. But yeah, that's how that's what mitochondrial Eve is.
There's one more super chat. This is more of a comment that says, was mitochondrial Eve hot? Did I just accidentally invent some new kind of incest porn?
Oh dear Lord.
Thank you, Zero.
She had something going.
Only Zero would do a super chat like that, you know?
Yeah. And also, I don't know if you heard me before, but Dr. Mays said, good work so far.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I hope I'm helping them. Hopefully this will be helpful for them once they can dig in. Yeah. All right. So what I'm talking about here is mutation rate versus substitution rate, and this is where I think a big disagreement between the two of them is gonna occur, because we have a mutation rate. I've got some. This is me and my cousin here with the sunglasses, and then this is my sister-in-law with her kids over there. The genes that code for our vision those are not on our mitochondria, but let's just pretend that they are for a moment. I have extremely bad eyesight, really, really bad eyesight. My prescription is -9, which if you convert that to 20/20 scale, I'm like 29, or I'm like 2,800 or something. So what a normal person can read 20 feet away, what I can read 20 feet away, a normal person can read 800 feet away. That's how bad my vision is without contact lenses.
Wow.
If I were a bear in the woods, I would be dead before I reproduced, right? I am out of the game. My cousin Paige has good eyes, but she has to wear glasses when she's driving. So she would probably survive as a bear in the woods. But my sister-in-law, Amy, she has 20/20 vision. She has perfect eyesight. And throughout the long course of evolutionary history, just pretend that that's coded for on the mitochondrial genome, her offspring are going to always, luck can play into things. Maybe Paige's offspring will be better than hers one year. But for the most part, her offspring are going to be slightly better, reproduce slightly better than Paige's. And eventually, Paige will be erased from history. So her mutation will disappear. And it's not going to be immediate. If you go to the next slide here. My mutation is so deadly that I'm out of the game immediately. Paige might be able to stick around for, who knows, like 1,000 generations, her mutation. But Amy's will eventually win out. It's almost guaranteed. It'd be a freak accident if Amy's did not win out. And because natural selection it's not always all or nothing right away. Sometimes it takes multiple generations for a mutation to get erased. This means that if we look at the mutation rate today, if we look at parents and children and count up the mutations between them, that number is going to be really high compared to if we count up the mutational differences between humans and chimps, because most of the differences between humans and chimps have been erased, right? Only the few beneficial mutations or the few truly neutral mutations have been allowed to continue in both of our genomes since our common ancestor. Everything else has been deleted. And a substitution rate is the rate that we use when we're making mitochondrial clocks, and the substitution rate takes that fact into account. It takes natural selection into account. Nathaniel believes that he can get mutation rates fast enough. He believes that if you look at human mutation rates, the differences between different people groups, between Europeans and Africans, for example, can be accounted for if you just look at our mutation rate from parent to child. And he's only able to, so he says that it could have been 4,000 years ago that we split. But that only works if you ignore natural selection. His equation completely ignores natural selection. It does not allow natural selection to work at all, actually, on mutations. And if we go to the next slide, here we have the mutation rate versus substitution rate. So mutation rate is the average number of mutations observed to occur each generation. And the substitution rate is the mutation rate minus the number of mutations weeded out by natural selection. It is graphed as a decay curve. And the next slide will show that graph. This is from a recent paper, and I can't read the title of the paper, unfortunately, here. I'll have to link to it afterwards for you guys. But this is a paper that's got the best substitution rate. Well, Mays might argue there's a better one now, but this was done in, I think, 2006 or 2008 or something. But this is the substitution rate graphed out. So we see this decay curve here. The dotted line up top is the mutation rate per generation. And that decays over time as you go backwards in time because natural selection has weeded things out. So the rate is not constant at all times. And if you use a chart like this, you can say, oh, I want to look at I want to know how many mutations I should find with someone that is related to me 100,000 years ago. You can use this curve to estimate ahead of time what you think the differences in your DNA should be. And the reason I say that this one is so good is because it works super well. This is what I was talking about with predictions. This is calibrated to the human-chimp split. And I think they split that at 7 million years ago. to the